popular topic on watch forums now is the definition of a tool watch. It's a term that's commonly used, and people debate what is a better tool watch than something else, or ask for advice typically on what kind of tool watch should they buy for doing the dishes or going on a cruise in the Caribbean. All joking aside, it's an interesting thing because traditionally, I think most people, when they think of tool watches, they think of dive watches, scuba watches that were made probably anywhere from the late 60s to the late 70s, when skin diving and scuba diving was very popular, and this is obviously pre-computer technology or dive computers and things like that. So back then, the idea of having a 60-minute bezel was a very important feature for a diver to have. And these watches are typically very rugged, and a lot of times, if you collect tool watches from the 70s, basically, you'll find a lot of them are very beat up. They've been hit by rocks, and it's the mineral crystal will typically be scratched, and it's very, very obvious that these watches typically were not used as investments that were kept in a safe deposit box, but were actually used. And for many people, that's actually part of their charm, the idea that these watches were used. And the idea that they carry their bruises, it's sort of, it gives the watch its character, I guess you can say. But if you fast forward to present day, there's still watches that are being defined as tool watches, but it becomes a bit more tricky, because especially once you start looking at watches that are 2, 3, 4, 5,000, upwards of 10,000 plus. To give a more extreme example, something like a Rolex Deep Sea Dweller that has been shown to withstand insane water pressure, but at the end of the day, can you really define a watch like that, and watches in a high price point, as a true tool watch? In my mind, they're more homages to tool watches of the 70s, in that they're meant to look like watches of the day, except typically larger, and they're well made, and you have no reason to believe they wouldn't survive the same kinds of damage dive watches of the 70s, tool watches of the 70s would typically have to tolerate. But the issue is, once you get these really expensive watches, it's, in my mind, difficult to believe that a lot of people are really out there using them on a day-to-day basis, bashing them and being okay with that. In my mind, I think a lot of these expensive so-called tool watches are being worn very carefully, sometimes even being kept in safe deposit boxes, and because people are afraid of destroying the value of the watch, which sort of makes the idea of a modern tool watch amusing, because if it's something that's so expensive, how can you really expect it to be a reliable everyday gadget? In my mind, the only real tool watches, practical tool watches in this day and age, are Citizens and Seikos that cost a few $100s, things like an Aqualand or an SKX 007, watches that are proven very reliable but are cheap enough to be replaced if they get damaged. It's just, I was just thinking about this recently when I was, because again, I like to collect dive watches of the 70s in particular, and it's just so interesting to look at those watches in the state they're in, and even look at the prices they cost, and compare it to modern luxury watches that are being marketed as tool watches. I mean, obviously this is my perspective, and I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on the matter, and as usual, thanks for listening to my thoughts, and feel free to subscribe if you like what you hear. Thanks.